Um, while we're waiting a bit, we've got a couple more meetings this year, and Ellison is taking the one on December 15th. I was curious if there's anything people want to make sure we discuss before the end of the year for next week. Ooh, the silence.
Cool. So I missed the meeting before Thanksgiving, I think. That's
Mhm.
the one where you talked about what NSF, what they told you. I was just, yeah. Anyway, I was wondering if it would be useful for us to go back to, you had sketched out how we want to list the themes and products that we're coming up with, compiling what we have now based on the discussions we've had since then. So we leave at the end of the year having a sense in this project of at least what products we're evolving towards and who's involved in each product. Then we can kind of look at, okay, is there a convergence here? What, yeah,
That's
something
the
like
sort
that.
of thing I was going to do if nobody had anything for next week. So return to what I learned from NSF. I posted the video so people can watch it. A lot of people weren't able to attend that meeting. So I'm happy to do that. But I wanted to see if there was something that needed attention before filling in the very last meeting of the year. Well, Ellison's got the very last meeting. That's the next open one. Okay, I'll probably do that then if no one has other ideas. Okay, so I want to talk about contractors today, or the middle people, or we can call them installers, but they're the people who actually do the work. I was hoping that Ali might be able to attend. I was able to catch up with her right before Thanksgiving too. She's at UC Berkeley now. She has an interesting position in that she's in a department still on the natural resource side, but she is also working in extension, and that's a lot of her job. So she doesn't have teaching responsibilities, but those have been replaced by extension and outreach responsibilities. And so she may contribute to this project, but I think that's something we have to decide. The way that we have structured this project is, in the original proposal, was that we were going to kind of figure out what we're doing the first 2 years, hopefully get continued funding, and the budget allows for an expansion in the latter 3 years if we're continued. And so at that time, we were going to bring in the labor component. At first, we were just to be focusing on the occupants, the experience of home transition. But what I've been hearing from people as we move forward is that this component that we might ascribe to labor or contractors or whatever you like to call it is really important. And I've been hearing a lot of, or I don't know about a lot, but several people saying, either saying that they would like to consider this aspect or actually moving forward to doing so, like Ryan with the work that he's been doing, looking at quality contractors. And so I wanted to acknowledge that seemed to be pushing itself forward as a theme, at least in some people's minds. And rather than continuing to put it off and saying, no, wait till we see if we get refunded, seems like a good thing to just acknowledge that it's kind of rearing its head, and have us explicitly decide what we want to do about it. So I've been looking forward to this discussion for a while. We may still end with a not knowing what to do, but at least we'll all have decided that, instead of just letting it come up without being acknowledged. So I want to start by just going around the Zoom room and hearing people say briefly, let's try to keep it brief, what do you think is the importance of contractors, installers, however you like to call it. And if you have a different perspective of what you think of as a contractor, not an installer, please say that too. And also, if you haven't considered them or they don't seem to be coming up in the type of work that you do, you can say that too. And so if you do think it's important for your type of work, what might you be missing if we just ignore that component? So I'm going to start with the PIs, or the investigators. So Ellison, Narasimha, Chris, Stacy. Putting that in the chat, and then I will let other people come in with their own perspectives. So Taylor, Raidul, Adam, Sarah, Kartik. Okay, so just a brief, like a minute kind of thought capture.
Okay, I'll start off. I view myself as being involved in two aspects of the project. One's a paper on well-being representations and field-based studies. I've talked about a lot with Tammy, now Zara, and somewhat with Narasimha and Karthik. I don't think contractors must be involved in that work. I think if somebody wanted to make a case for why we should include it as well, I'm open to that, but I don't think I need to deal with it in that paper. And then the other work stream that I think I've been involved in, although I don't know where it stands at the moment, is the participatory system mapping. And there it seems that this set of stakeholders is important to identify who might contribute to those focus group exercises. I don't think that they're a must-have, but they'll be an obvious omission if we left them out.
Can you say something about why? Let's kind of dig down why.
I think if we are interested in understanding one of the two nodes, either theory of change around how people make decisions in their home related to energy, or how people think about their home with respect to well-being, I think it seems very valuable to have contrast between what residents say themselves as residents of their own home, and then the people that are sort of asked to come when something's going wrong, usually, or when something is unsatisfying. So I think having a perspective of somebody that works to fix something or upgrade something would be a really nice contrast, maybe even a necessary contrast with what people say they do for themselves in their home. Does that get at your question?
Yeah, thank you. Narasimha, you're up next.
Yeah, so I'm involved in critiquing existing modeling approaches and trying to develop new modeling approaches, and also trying to understand what data are out there, what we can get from it, and what new data we need for that effort, the modeling effort. So I see so I'm defining in my mind contractors as those who are doing the installation of heating equipment, and in particular, that's the focus I have right now. I see two important contributions. I think in the literature, the installation cost, the actual customization of heating systems, heat pumps in particular, are excluded, especially in the US. And those are a significant component of cost, but also of understanding the constraints for people making decisions to adopt heat pumps. Contractors influence households in those decisions too, because they have information. So understanding the final costs to people, households, is really important, and the only way to get it is from contractors. Well, no, it's not the only way. One can get it from households too, but they are one important source of information. And the second thing is, they have a lot of insights on customers' views, customers' preferences on heating systems. A little bit like what Ellison was saying. It's an alternative view, but I know from some examples, anecdotal examples, that contractors make customizations to serve customers' unique interests. So I would want to, in the second phase of this project, I don't think there's much we can do in the first phase, although I'm curious as to what Ryan is doing. I don't actually know. I would want to do systematic data collection, trying to survey and interview contractors. I think it'll be really important. I know of a study in the UK that actually documented the costs, the actual final costs, including contractor installation costs, etc. Very valuable. So I'd like to do the same for the US.
Chris.
All right, so my role is conducting the interviews and certainly helping develop papers around some of the more qualitative themes that emerge from those interviews. I do think contractors are going to play or could play an important piece in addressing some of the central research questions that we have, in part because, again, with the very limited number of interviews that I have conducted, I am getting the impression that the residents aren't necessarily aware of the different options they have available as it relates to energy upgrades. I suspect, and I don't have any knowledge about this yet, but I suspect that contractors and installers play and I do see them as different people, but I see them as being very influential on the decision related to what to adopt, and explaining to consumers how those products work, what they do, why one option is, perhaps better than another for them. Certainly cost will factor into that, but I suspect there are other factors as well, and I believe that contractors probably play a very important role in residents knowing what is available to them.
Thanks, Chris. Stacy.
So in terms of the like community advisory board, we haven't included any contractor perspectives yet at this time. If that's something that's of interest to the group, I think that there's work that we can do to invite contractors to a meeting to be part of some of the dialogue and conversations. I was writing down some notes while others were speaking, just based off of kind of my own reactions to the other PIs, and I'm curious, like, if there's, I don't know, I'm curious if there's like a chicken or the egg kind of scenario. Are contractors shaping like the awareness and the information that customers have that then they claim, there's demand for, or are customers shaping the demand that contractors are responding to? I don't know if that's clear, and I have no clue what the research is in that space. And if it exists, I also have no clue if it's relevant, to this project, or if that's tangential. And then I was also wondering, like, and how does that also tie back to well-being, if we're always tying this to well-being and transitions? I completely agree they're influential in the decisions and explaining how products work. Contractors, in my experience, all talk about the upfront costs. You know, this is how much the system is going to cost you to install. I've not had any successful conversations with contractors on what is the life cycle operational cost of running the systems. No one has seemed to answer the question, all right, what is my bill going to be in January with a heat pump? The answers are always, well, it depends on the cost of energy and it depends on the temperature that you leave your house at. You know, there's all these depends, but no one wants to do the math. So I'm learning what that math is and grateful that I have solar right now. So I think that it would be very interesting to push contractors a little bit if they were in the room, to ask them if they could get more serious about providing information about operational costs so that customers have a way to not just compare the cost of a natural gas furnace to a heat pump installation, but what is it going to cost me to heat my home over time and cool it as it may.
Great, thanks. And then now on to some of the junior members. Again, some of you have been here a very short time, so if you don't want to comment, that's perfectly acceptable. But if you have something to add, another way in which you see installers being important or not being important, please say so. So Taylor.
Sure. I think obviously in participatory system mapping, they're going to be very important as giving a perspective separate from what the homeowner is seeing and saying on their side, and also separate from that higher level understanding of more national movements for energy transitions. However, something that came up just listening to everybody is, and it might be me not understanding much about contractors' work or construction and things like that in general, but I was just curious if there are factors like Chris mentioned, these people are very influential on the decision of what homeowners adopt, but I don't know if there is any underlying connections that the contractors might have. Like if they're a larger company, do they sway people one way or the other based on if they're like the preferred contractor of an HOA and the HOA prefers people to not have, I don't know, an ugly swamp cooler on their house, or, you know, things like that. I don't know. I was curious if those type of things could play into sway, or if they have a relationship with a certain manufacturer of something and they get, you know, X amount if they sell so many per year, just those type of things. And if that would play into decision making since they are so influential.
Very cool.
Yeah, so from the modeling perspective, I'm really interested in the overall contractor process, in the sense that I feel that owner will take into consideration some specific contractor characteristics like their reliability. They will go on the online network or social network to find out how much reliability or experience do they have in terms of installing those heat pump process. And also if they have some schedule availability, I feel that this particular characteristics, I'm not sure if they will be able to reverse the decision-making process of an occupant, but I feel that that would at least affect the temporal heat adoption process in the long term. Another factor I'm really interested to understand if the interaction between contractor and occupant vary depending on whether they're renter or owner. The information gathering process or interaction process, does that vary depending on that particular characteristics of occupant? To me, that contractor part will be at least similar to the activation process of overall the heat pump adoption process. So in that way, I'm really interested in that phase. Thank you.
Thanks for doing. Adam.
Yeah, I should forewarn you, I have COVID, so I'm not my sharp and charming self. But I think that, I mean, Chris maybe alluded to this a little bit. installers and contractors of various types are going to be key sources of information for households to make decision. I think their relationship is not the same as like a relationship that you have with, say, a salesperson, even though that's to some extent kind of what they're doing. And so I think they can direct consumers or households towards or away certain products and towards or away certain decisions based upon their own capabilities and their own capacities and, maybe what they honestly think is best. So to me, contractors are there's lots of research on like household adoption of energy innovations of various types that does surveys or focus groups of households or maybe works with secondary data. But to me, the contractor piece is sort of a missing piece that hasn't been studied, at least my impression is, all that much empirically. And it'd be nice to know, our contractors, if someone says, I want a heat pump, can they say, oh, I know what that is, and we've got a guy that can install it, or something like that, that's great. That's a good thing to do. And I'm not sure that we have a good handle on that, if that makes sense. And it would also be interesting to know what their model of household decision making is, why they think households choose to do the things that they do. And I think that's intellectually very interesting, I guess.
And latest but not least, Kartik.
Yeah, since my work is mostly using existing data sets to develop, indicators of well-being and energy insecurity, I don't really see a direct way to include the contractor issue just because the existing data sets don't have these variables. So there's nothing that says, do you have a contractor that you work with, have trust in, and things like that. So yeah, I'm not really sure how I will be including this, into the well-being frameworks and the decision-making processes just based on what is already out there. So
Okay. So I will say something, but let me first summarize what I've heard. I think a number of people mentioned contractors as an information conduit, how homeowners or occupants get information with which to make a decision, and that information can be both favorable or unfavorable to adoption of particular technologies. And some of those ways are favoring certain technologies or excluding or being unable to relay information about cost of operation. And so the fact that occupants see contractors as a source of information, and they may be very imperfect sources of information, is a potential for the decision to have imperfect information, as well as not just information, but perhaps influence. I think Adam mentioned that this might be a missing or unique piece of what's not in some investigations into technology change. So that's something we could emphasize. And then a thing that I'd like to, first I'd like to say that one of the reasons I was interested in including this middle person has to do with what other people have said in terms of the information that these people convey. And I think a lot of my information is anecdotal, but I've heard so many stories that are like, they didn't even tell me about this, or I brought it up and they told me not to do that, right? Like they didn't want to deal with it. And I suspect that it's a whole different world of how information is communicated and how decisions are preferred. The other aspect that interests me, being part of the dynamic team, is something that is a concern to DOE right now, which is, if we are going to make massive change, who is going to do the work? So from a dynamic perspective, the lack of installers, and which I agree are different than contractors, is an issue. How do you handle that workforce? So there's a whole workforce movement at DOE, and I'm not sure exactly how they're looking at this, but how do you train up people to do the work and then not leave them behind when the bump passes, for example? And Stacy, in your other work, you're probably focused on some of this, I would expect. And so you don't have to put blinders on, but you're probably thinking about that in your clean energy workforce. Did you
Yeah,
wanna?
I think a lot of people at the state level, in my work with CDAC, are really thinking about workforce development, and incentivizing workforce development, creating policies that basically create pots of money and funding for training, for development of projects, for development activities that contractors could do to build programs, to build additional contractors in the program, to create the pipeline, and contractor incubator program. So I don't know if I think the state is trying, at least in Illinois, and I don't know about other states right now, but trying to like kind of vertically integrate the idea that like we have untrained people that need jobs. We need to create the pathways for training, that we need for places for people to go. There has been a lot of trial and error in the solar energy pipeline or solar training pipeline. So starting with, okay, we're going to provide a lot of NABCEP training for solar installers in the state, and a missing link was, now where do they go for work after they've been trained? Are there installation companies available for people to land in for their first job or an internship, or to continue their professional training? We also talk a lot about wraparound services for people. I don't know what a traditional path is anymore. If you say like you go straight from high school to college to a job. So people who haven't received like a lot of educational supports are often where these programs are targeted to folks who have been left out of these systems and training opportunities in the past. And then also finding that means reaching out into harder to reach communities, into communities who don't have healthy economies, a lot of areas that experience higher levels of poverty and injustice. So thinking about, all right, what do people need to be supported on their kind of journey from getting into a training program or apprenticeship program, through supporting them through their first job when there may be kids at home that need support and you can't make it to every training class, or there may be transportation issues that need to be worked on. So I think Illinois is really trying to work on this very holistically and coming from a place of equity in terms of providing opportunities to people who have been left out traditionally of these systems. And we'll see how that goes. I think that like it's early stages in these programs, and I look forward to seeing outcomes from participants and organizations that apply to run these programs on behalf of the state. I wish I knew more about Colorado. I'm curious about, Colorado's thoughts on workforce development in these spaces, and what's kind of happening there for green energy or construction and environmental jobs.
Yeah, and I think I'm not the person to answer your question right now, but I think that these kinds of things, if we move toward a broader picture of labor, that we would want to be very careful about how to include it. And so that'll be a further discussion down the road. But when I say be careful, what I mean is it would be really easy to bite off a lot more than we could chew.
Yeah.
That would defocus the project, right, and not be of benefit. And yet I recognize that the addition of energy transitions that provide jobs is also a contribution to well-being. And so it's not all about cost, it's also about what are you doing for the community. The other thing that I have an interest in, and again, I recognize this may not be where we go as a team, but the importance of building a workforce for quality, right? Because if and this has happened before, where if you get a bunch of people who anybody can install, then you end up installing a bunch of stuff that isn't ever going to be reinstalled and lacks quality. And so you create then a lock-in of inefficient or ineffective interventions. And so that, again, that might not be where we go, but I'm interested in exploring the slower, maybe better sometimes, as a contrast to what people are demanding is the rapid pace of energy transitions. So that's my interest in it. And the reason that Ali was drawn in is that she hasn't worked on contractors as such. She's mostly worked with agricultural labor, but looking at their well-being and as well the importance of certification. So, okay, so now where do we go from here? It sounds like we're beginning to write another proposal here. So maybe my question is, acknowledging that there's this uncertainty about our future, we can't plan a detailed response to this, but I do think recognizing what Adam raised, that this is kind of a missing piece in a lot of the literature. Is it possible that we could that this could be one of the things we bring forward during our review as we're beginning to develop this, and this is a place we're going to grow into, and that justifies expansion of the project. And I don't want to do it only for that reason, but it is a nice coincidence. So I think that was what we kind of threw out in the proposal. Yeah, and then after a while we're going to add labor, but it feels like people are really interested in that, except for some of the methods like Kartik's that don't have a way to include it. So I'm not hearing you say, Kartik, this is unimportant, just that it's not appearing in your work because it can't. Is that right? And I am hearing also a lot of interest in that middle person, however we define it, as a limiting factor, a conduit, and all those things. Is that right? Does anyone want to disagree with me? Shoot me down. There's somebody, you took your mute off. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. I was going to prompt a question that you actually then asked, which is what are we going to do about it? I guess the thing I would, yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's really, really important that we have plenty of motivation to try and tackle it. I see many angles. There's a policy angle, like you said, DOE. Everyone's interested in the supply chain constraints and actually getting the energy transition moving. There's just a people angle, human rights angle, or in terms of livelihoods and protecting jobs, sort of just transition angle. But I thought we should be focusing on the research angle. That is, how does an understanding of contractors improve our ability to answer the questions we've set out in this convergence project? I think there's scope for other ways, the other angles too, since this is a convergence project. My bias is as a researcher trying to advance knowledge. So I was thinking of how we might consider expanding the project to understand that whole segment of the value chain, you know, interviewing them, or they're learning about the relationship between them and customers, or trying to understand, okay, how are they influencing people's decisions? I mean, that's a hugely relevant component of our work. That's a very, very nice addition, because no one in the literature has mentioned that at all, really. Systematically studied that. I mean, you know, in all the literature I looked at, no one systematically looked at that, even though everyone agrees that they have an influence. So if we were to propose some work in that direction, I think it would be super useful and super innovative.
So I see there's 3 classes of things we could do. One is things we can add to our current work that we're doing anyway, that doesn't require renewal of the project. And I think those things are small in number and very easy, and I'll name them. One is, depending on how quickly the participatory system mapping goes, we could include that group as another group. So one of the discussions in that group, which we need to bring forward to you early next year, is what are the groups that we're looking at, right? What are the divisions? How do we lump people in and coalesce their theories of change? So contractors could be presented as another group to contrast. The other thing is, if we have any notion of themes from Chris's interviews, or just something simple that the contractor has been suggested as one of the agents in Raidul's model, and it may not be the very first round of the model, but it could be possibly the second. But in the limited time remaining for the first 2 years of the project, I really think those are the only 2 things we can do. I would, and so the other 2 buckets are things that we could propose during our review as the expansion of the project. So those would be things that we would not undertake, but begin to flesh out what are the methods for doing this. And so that might be a discussion early in the new year also. You know, this is less what exactly are we going to do, and how do we pitch it as integrated with the project when we go up for review. And then the third bucket is things that we're either not going to do or going to take a separate project. And I also encourage those, right? Especially the ones that are going to take there might be another add-on or another thing to seek funding for, right? It's going to be very difficult to do everything we need to do in this project. And so whether it continues to be research, as Narasimha says, or whether it gets more into other aspects that are less researchy and more trying to change how things are done, not really sure how that plays out. But I think there's a number of things we could do. Some are going to be far from our expertise that we can't contribute to, but others are going to be more germane to the kinds of things we're doing. So curious about thoughts on that. Being planned for pre-review. I'm looking at, let me get thoughts on that, then I'll come back to your question, Narasimha, because it's a different topic. Does anyone object to what I've said? Does it sound wrong, or think we should change the course or nudge it? Okay, so okay, I'm gonna assume you've approved that, whatever was. You okay with that? And please feel free to bring that forward. I think a question, or bring ideas forward, because this was just an hour of discussion. And so things may pop into your head later that that you could let us know.
Just to clarify, Tammy, if we think that it's useful to do some qualitative research in phase 2 early on to try and survey contractors, that's something that we should agree to doing and actually sort of try and develop a little bit for the review so we can propose it as one of the things we would do in phase 2, right?
That's right. I think early in the year, we should begin identifying what are the types of things we should do. I think one of the things that we want to take a decision on is whether we want to go the direction we had planned with Ollie or whether we want to do something else. And I think Ollie would ultimately like to know that too. So, of course, if we don't get renewed, then nobody needs to know anything. But I think it'll be like a couple of meetings where we try to coalesce a little more around what we would propose. Is
Okay.
that
Yeah, is it relevant to ask now, or can I find out separately? You said Ryan is doing some work with contractors?
Brian has done some work on, and I wish he was here to explain it because I've only picked it up tangentially, that when he was doing his data gathering, he identified some of the people who did the work as quality installers who had certain certifications, and then he had some correlations with those and who was actually choosing them. So that's as far as I can go. But he's acknowledging that connection. Ryan, if you're watching, give us a report.
Well, and I asked this question in the chat only because you mentioned one of the things we could potentially do is to invite them to a participatory system mapping meeting.
Yeah.
So I was just curious if that's actually something on the cards.
Yep. So I can address that now if we're satisfied with where we're leaving the contractor direction. Okay, so Ellison and I and Taylor and I have met in various ways on the participatory system mapping and what we would propose. And it's actually written into one of the themes that is on the drive. And so Taylor will be taking a lead role, at least in organizing and operationalizing. And Ellis and I have had some discussions about the steps. And so I can tell you what those steps look like very briefly. One, we need to make some methodological decisions, like what script would we use, what would be the first things we would ask of the focus group. Adam, your feedback on what you've learned would be useful. I think you're putting something on that together, so that would be great. So there's some methodological decisions, and then we're going to try a script, and we're going to practice on not our first target population, but for unsuspecting graduate students, probably. And I've also spoken with somebody who does a lot of community engagement, who would mentor and guide and give us feedback on. We would lead that and be the facilitators, but then we would have input from somebody who does this sort of thing all the time, so we can increase our skill. So that learning process will probably take at least until the end of January now. Because when you get to try to schedule groups of students that you could practice on, this is not the time of year to do it. So it's going to have to be early in January, and maybe they'll be more excited about an hour and free pizza or whatever at the end of January. And then we would be scheduling groups to do the techniques with. So that's where we are right now, and I'm not committing to when those would those sessions would happen, because we need to get through the initial steps first, and they seem to always take longer than I hope. Another feature of this is that I'm hoping that Rydul would observe the sessions. He wouldn't be involved in facilitating them, but he would be an observer to help us take the outputs and be able to compare the diagrams, the causal loop diagrams that come forward in a quantitative way with his network analysis background. So he's just going to sit and watch, and then he'll help us be analytical about it. Does that address your question?
Me? Oh, yeah, of
I
course.
wasn't quite sure what you meant by pre-review, so.
No, I just meant that we're actually scheduling it before June 24. Like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I'm hoping that this is one of the products that we have.
yeah. Okay, okay. And would it be Chatham House type things in the sense that participants are going to have some confidence that there's no attribution to what they say, something like that?
So I think it'll naturally come out that way. One of the methodological decisions we have to make is, are we producing through a focus group type process, a sort of winnowed down causal loop diagram? You know, sometimes you come out of these PSM things and you have these 400 arrows and it's like, well, what am I going to do with that? And so the selection process of which are the most important connections, I personally feel is an important part of the process. So because it's a common product from a group, I don't think there would be attribution. I think it'll naturally smooth out the attribution or obscure it. Any other questions about that?
I'm curious about the meeting itself. Would it be, I mean, recorded or something like that, documented for those who are not at the meeting? I'd be really curious to learn from it or learn about it.
So I don't know that yet. That's another methodology question. People may behave differently if they're being recorded. And as well, some of the techniques will probably not be amenable to being recorded.
Mhm.
So, for example, if we ask them to identify the influential factors, and you know, we're going to have to develop our language so that it's stuff that normal people understand, right? But influential factors are nodes on a diagram, and they do it with a post-it exercise. It's not that great to record it. It's because then you're not getting some of the interaction. However, I do think it would be good for us all to be made familiar with it by doing it ourselves. So that everybody would get to feel it. And we may do one online with, you know, sort of energy experts, because one of our hypotheses is that experts think change works in a different way than normal people think change works. Adam, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, on the recording issue, I mean, sometimes in more conventional qualitative research, the sort of data product is a transcript. And in this case, the data product is essentially a causal loop diagram, or, you know, it goes by about a half a dozen different names. So I'm not sure if you would want to produce both data products anyway. If you'd want to also have a transcript that you sort of evaluated, because I think my sense is that in most applications, the system map, aka causal loop diagram, is like the sort of the primary output, if that makes any sense. And you're not going to typically go back and evaluate a transcript and for themes and things like that. I mean, so I'm sure somebody has. I'm not saying that that's, but those seem to be sort of separate, I guess, separate traditions in qualitative research, I suppose.
And I think what Narasim is saying, forgive me if I'm misinterpreting you, but he's saying, hey, I'm really interested in this. I want to watch it. And so
Yeah. I thought you wanted to transcribe it and code it for themes. So yeah, I may have misunderstood.
No, transcribing is good enough. Transcribing is the next best thing, especially if it's not going to, if it's going to make a big difference in terms of influencing or not influencing how people are going to participate, then that's important.
Yeah, that's
But
yeah, it's an open question, I think. You're right.
that's a fair point too. Yeah. But I think also my expectation is that if it's successful, you would not be able to reproduce the process and the feeling without being in the room. And so that's just important to recognize that there are techniques that are evocative that you just sorry you got to be there, and not really sorry, but you know, these are humans and their humanness comes out when they're being human. So I don't have anything more to say today. Does anyone have last words for us?
I just had a side chat with Chris. I was expressing interest in learning about his interviews. I think it's really fascinating, some of the side chats I've had with you, Tammy. And I thought maybe the whole group could benefit. And we were discussing that maybe early Jan, we can have a group meeting where he just presents preliminary findings and we can have a discussion on them.
Chris, do you feel ready to do that, or do you want to wait to get through a few more? How would you like to play that?
I'll leave that up to you guys. I'm still at 12. I'm sending out a round of letters today. They'll actually go out here in a couple hours. So my guess is that between now and January, I certainly hope to get much closer to that sort of ultimate goal of 20. So yeah, I'd feel comfortable talking about what we have found so far.
Okay. Okay, I don't want to push you before you get the number that you want, but it is interesting. It's always interesting.
Yeah, and I kind of want to keep you guys as updated as I can throughout the process. So yeah, I would feel comfortable doing that.
Okay. Okay, so next week we're going to have sort of revisit of the themes. I think Allison and Narsima, yours are not, your review products are not yet described, so I encourage you to take a look at that. Do you need me to send you the link to the document?
You mean the slides?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I have it. I'm sorry. Just haven't put
Yeah, but no, that's fine. I will do it. I'm looking forward to discussing with the subgroup next week one more time to iron out my scope,
Great.
and then I'll be ready.
We'll be
Actually,
there.
Alison, if you're able to join that one too, that'll be useful if you have the time.
when is it?
Same thing next Tuesday, 10 a.m.
Okay.
Eastern time,
Okay.
but only if you have time. It's not, yeah, it's.
And then on the 15th, Allison is going to talk about the well-being work, and that'll be it for the year. Okay, thank you, everyone. Nice to see you.
Bye
Thank
all.
you.
Bye.